Previously on the Main Street Chronicles. Our eager learners discovered the connection between the early days of the Walt Disney Studios and what made Imagineering legends legendary. Mark Davis was the key that will open the door to the possibilities of adventure, romance, and humor that Walt and Sam will uncover as they continue on this unexpected journey. Let's listen in as Archimedes introduces them to yet another Disney Imagineering legend.
Archimedes, thank you so much for sharing those wonderful stories with us. I really loved the one of Mark and Miss Alice. Weren't they just perfect, Walt?
Oh, what? Yes. Whatever you say.
Ha 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 ha! You are most welcome, my dear. Would you like for me to answer your question about the Haunted Mansion?
Oh, yes, please.
Well, step this way and let me introduce to you Claude Coats. Claude was a master of scene designs, as you can see right here as we look at his animator's desk.
But I thought you were going to tell me about the Haunted Mansion.
See that model over there?
I do, but I don't know what it is.
Patience, my dear. We will get there. But this is a stepping stone that will unlock the answers to your question when we look at that model.
I'm sorry, I'm just so excited to continue learning.
Now, Claude got his start with the Walt Disney Company working on a Mickey short called Mickey's Fire Brigade.
Oh, we know that one. Donald, Mickey, and Goofy are firefighters trying to put out an apartment fire, and they need to rescue Clarabelle.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one. They were actually terrible firefighters. And if I remember right, Clarabelle thought that they were trying to kidnap her.
It's so awesome knowing that we're about to learn all about one of the Imagineers that worked on yet another thing that we're familiar with. These Imagineering stories really tie all of the different parts of being a Disney fan together. What else did Claude work on that we would be familiar with, Archimedes?
Take a look at his drawing table here, and you can see a few of his background paintings, along with a few murals from inside of Disneyland.
So I'm looking at these Archimedes, and there aren't any characters in them. How are we supposed to know what they're from?
Well, background paintings are meant to add to the story, but some like the ones here are iconic to the Disney movies that they're in. Here we have Geppetto's workshop from Pinocchio, and this is a background from Song of the South.
What Song of the South?
Well, my dear, it's a long-lost Disney animated and live-action classic that unfortunately cannot be released today because it is viewed to be culturally insensitive. But you can still enjoy Brer Rabbit, Brer Fox, and Brer Bear in Splash Mountain at many of the Disney Magic Kingdom style parks.
Well, I sure wish there was a way that we could experience that movie.
Wouldn't that be nice? Hey, what are these other two backgrounds over here?
Oh, those are two murals that Claude created inside of Disneyland. Here is one for Mr. Toad's Wild Ride and another for Peter Pan's Flight.
Whoa. Stop right there. I didn't know that there was a ride for Mr. Toad. And he is one of my favorite Disney characters of all time. So I think the most important question we can have answered right now is, where can I find the Mr. Toad's Wild Ride?
Well, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride can only be found at Disneyland now.
Well, call me the Super Bowl MVP, because looks like I'm going to Disneyland.
Hey, there's a button here. Let's see what our historians can tell us about Claude's art background.
Claude attended the Chenard Art Institute, where he became an accomplished watercolorist and a member of the California Watercolor Society. A fellow member of the society approached Claude one day about his talent and encouraged him to interview with Walt Disney Studios. Claude compiled his portfolio of background paintings that he felt represented the likeness of Disney cartoons he had previously seen. Claude interviewed and was hired as an apprentice background painter in June of 1935 to start his career with the company.
Claude got his first screen credit for the backgrounds in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Claude had an eye for color and mood. He said the way you use shapes and color to help place emphasis on where you want people to look and what you want them to see. Disney screenwriter Steve Hewlett said that the background Claude created for Pinocchio made the film an excellent opportunity to use the multiplane camera techniques because each scene was so strongly stressed. Hewlett said that Claude's work on the scenes opened the door for the film to be appreciated just through its scenic value. The same goes for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Claude said the breakthrough techniques with lighting, color, and the multiplane camera brought the emotional responses to these films that can come from a background painting. Now in 1955, Claude joined the staff of WED Enterprises, now Walt Disney Imagineering, to lend his creative talents to the opening of Disneyland. He said, "I had a break in my background work where I wasn't busy, so I got to do the model for the Mr. Toad attraction. Ken Anderson had done the development work on the ride, but with opening day fast approaching, the scenic studio hired to paint the full-size settings informed Walt that they wouldn't be finished on time. So Walt said to Ken and I, 'You guys do it.'" I found it really interesting in the quote that we shared about the breakthrough techniques with lighting, color, and the multiplane camera, and how they brought the emotional responses to these films that can come from a background painting. And it's a really good point because if you look back at the movies or the shorts created before the invention of the multiplane camera, the backgrounds were static, almost as if they were there to just fill space. But when you bring in the multiplane camera, the backgrounds come to life in a sense, and almost feels as if they are their own characters.
I completely agree. The background is something that a lot of times people just take for granted because you're focused on the action that's actually happening at the time and the characters that are involved with that. But the background really helps complete the story and really does help bring things to life. And Claude Coats is one, especially with utilizing that multiplane camera to its fullest extent, really helped give that depth to Disney movies that set them apart.
Exactly, and working on that opening scene where you pan into the town where Geppetto lives, and then one of his most famous backgrounds is Geppetto's workshop. It's absolutely beautiful, the level of detail that you can have in a background to really make you feel like you are in that scene. And when you're in it, you see the carvings, and you can almost, it's way before the invention of 3D, but you can almost touch them. And because you feel the level of detail that's there, it's not flat. And I think Claude really did a great job of being able to bring those backgrounds and those stories to life through the use of his scenic background work.
Exactly, and that's what's incredible about it too, is we're talking about this in 2020. Think back to when Pinocchio was out. This was groundbreaking for the time, and he really was able to bring those backgrounds to life, and it makes the story, even though it's animation, it makes it a lot more realistic for the viewer.
It really does, and he takes those skills and he takes them over to Disneyland, and he uses his skills in the mural department to turn the once two-dimensional films into three-dimensional fantasy worlds that we as guests get to enjoy on a daily basis at Disneyland.
Wow, it's so interesting being able to hear about how he helps utilize the multiplane camera.
Wow, what is this?
That's the original Haunted Mansion from Disneyland, right?
Very good! This is the original model that Walt Disney himself actually approved before construction began.
The origin of the Haunted Mansion goes back to 1951, 4 years before the opening of Disneyland and a year before WED Enterprises was founded. Walt's original idea for his Mickey Mouse park that would have been located across the street from his Burbank studio would have had its very own haunted house. It had a working title of Church, Graveyard, and Haunted House. Disneyland would open on July 17, 1955, but something was missing: Walt's haunted house. The Haunted Mansion would be brought back to life in 1957 when Walt assigned Ken Anderson to work on it for the first expansion of Disneyland. Ken was perfect for the job as he was able to combine fear and enjoyment on some of the original Fantasyland dark rides, like Snow White's Scary Adventures and Mr. Toad's Wild Ride.
Walt went public with the announcement of New Orleans Square in 1958. This would be the home of his Haunted Mansion. As the story goes, Ken had drawn a pencil sketch of a decaying antebellum mansion with overgrown landscape, trees covered with Spanish moss, giving them a foreboding feel, and bats circling in dark clouds above the house. Everyone at WED loved it except for one person: Walt Disney himself. Walt didn't like the idea of a broken down house. He went on to say, "We'll take care of the outside and let the ghosts take care of the inside." Ken then tabled the concept and went to work on the inside of the mansion instead. Fast forward to 1961, and a handbill was passed out at Disneyland saying that New Orleans Square, along with the Haunted Mansion, would be ready to accept visitors in 1963. Well, 1963 came, but the Haunted Mansion was not ready for her debut. It was a shell of a building with only the exterior complete. Walt continued to tease the project to keep interest up, but New Orleans Square and the Haunted Mansion would be put on hold for the biggest experiment at the time in the history of the Walt Disney Company. Walt continued to tease the project to keep the interest up, but New Orleans Square and the Haunted Mansion would be put on hold for the biggest experiment at the time in the history of the Walt Disney Company, the 1964-1965 New York World's Fair.
When work began on the fair, Ken Anderson needed to return to his duties at the studio, so this left the mansion with even more uncertainty. So after the fair, Walt assigned Mark Davis and background artist Claude Coats to the project. Mark was brought on to develop the characters that would inhabit the mansion, while Claude was brought in to focus on designing the mansion's interior environments, constructing lavish sets for Mark's characters to perform their ghostly tricks. The mansion would again see another setback when on December 15, 1966, Walt Disney would pass away from lung cancer. There was, however, someone who had faith in the project. WED Enterprises Vice President of Design, Dick Irvine, felt that there were two master Imagineers who could guide the Haunted Mansion to completion. The partnership of Mark Davis and Claude Coats had enjoyed huge success with Pirates of the Caribbean, which was a testament to Walt's knack for building exceptional creative teams. Walt knew that combining Mark's brilliant character design and ingenious sight gags with Claude's strengthened backgrounds, layout, and set design would produce greater results than any single artist alone. With the success of Pirates, however, led to both Mark and Claude feeling like they had each earned the right to take the creative lead on themselves. This led to creative tension instead of the winning partnership that was expected. One wanted the mansion to be funny, while the other wanted it to be scary. Mark was able to convince Dick Irvine that the Haunted Mansion needed to be more of a comedy show than a horror show.
Mark and Claude's creative differences resulted in two distinct experiences within the attraction. The first half of the show is all about the environment, which can be attributed to Claude's experience as a background artist. It is more ominous and scarier with very few characters. The second half of the attraction is less reliant on a strong set and more so on Mark's characters and sight gags. The conflicting approaches is one reason why there is not a fluid story throughout the attraction, so it was up to another legendary Imagineer to tie them all together, ex Atencio.
In the book The Haunted Mansion From the Magic Kingdom to the Movies by former Imagineer Jason Sorrell, we learned a really unique piece about the delays from the Haunted Mansion. Let me share it with you. The time-consuming delays and debates did have one positive side effect. By 1967, the perfect ride system solution was available. So originally, this was going to be a walkthrough attraction, but now, with the delays, they were able to find this perfect solution, and here it is. Walt had just passed away as we started to work on the show again, Claude Coats told Imagineers Bruce Gordon and David Mumford in the Nickel Tour. We had just finished up the Monsanto ride, Adventures Through Inner Space. The attraction featured a new and unique ride system called the Omnimover, a direct descendant of the Wedway People Mover developed for the Ford's Magic Skyway at the New York World's Fair. As it is told, one day in the mid-1960s, Bob Gurr, an Imagineer, was sitting in art director and Imagineering legend John Hench's office discussing what WED had learned from the fair. John happened to have a plastic apple sitting on his desk. Bob picked up the faux fruit and began to spin it completely around by the stem. Struck by the image, he remarked to John that they needed to develop a continuous chain ride car that could rotate 360 degrees like the apple. Using the People Mover as a starting point, WED created the Omnimover. The Omnimover consists of a train of swiveling clamshell-shaped pods that can spin, turn, and tilt to point the guests in any direction, narrowly focusing their attention, just as film directors do with their cameras. Guests would see exactly what the Imagineers wanted them to see, exactly when they wanted them to see it. The new system would also allow the Imagineers to send an endless stream of guests through the attraction at a constant rate, meeting Disneyland's capacity requirements and then some. WED copied Adventure Through Inner Space clamshell pods, painted them black, and dubbed them the Doom Buggies.
That's really funny because you think of the Omnimover now as something that's such a no-brainer, but you think back to things like Haunted Mansion, obviously, and Pirates of the Caribbean that were originally supposed to be walk-through attractions, but when you bring into it the idea of hourly capacity and how many guests you need to get through the attraction per day, the Omnimover is something that's really ends up being a game changer. And we can call back to an earlier quote that we had dealing with Claude Coats with his work with the studio as a background artist, where we mentioned that you use background colors and characters and movement there to draw people's attention to certain things, and the Omnimover and even the background work in attractions like Haunted Mansion do the exact same thing. the Omnimover, being the ride vehicle itself, can literally turn guests to face exactly what Imagineers want them to see. And the background there in the attractions acts very similar to that in a movie or a cartoon short, where it just backs up the main action and focuses guests' attention to specific things.
And on top of that, it actually also cuts down on costs because they don't have to completely theme the entire soundstage or the entire room that you're riding through. It's whatever is focused by the clamshells, by the Omnimover. And those allow them to focus and put more effort into those scenes and that line of sight that you're going to have while you're on that ride vehicle, and allow them to focus their talents on other places instead of, say, a boat ride or a walk-through attraction where you have to theme the entire space to make sure that everything is covered and everything is completely themed. An Omnimover is a nice way to focus on specific areas.
Exactly. It gives the Imagineers that just little bit more of control to where they can focus their creativity towards specific things instead of having to worry about how do we cover this part of the ceiling or this part of the wall because people are going to see it. You can focus people to the exact action and put all of your time and all of your effort into that to make it an even more incredible experience.
See, Sam, I told you would find out the rest of the story later.
I'm speechless. I had no idea that there was so much back and forth and uncertainty around the Haunted Mansion.
Many wondered if it would ever be completed. But it is to the Imagineers' credit that even through the difficult times, they wanted to deliver on a promise that Walt made to the public.
So I've learned enough at this point to know that everything in here has a purpose, but I'm having a hard time figuring out what this big green pillar is doing here.
Oh, come over here and take a look at this.
Oh, no. Okay, so I think the more important question is, what is a full-size Brontosaurus doing here?
What do you think?
What do I think? I think it's really gigantic and doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Sam, why don't you press the button and let's help fill Walt in on what's going on here?
It's fitting that we are using a gentle giant to talk about the gentle giant of Walt Disney Imagineering. At 6'6", Claude stood head and shoulders over almost all of the other Imagineers. He coincidentally worked on every single dinosaur project for WED and later Walt Disney Imagineering during his time there. The first project was Ford Magic Skyway for the 1964-1965 New York World's Fair, sponsored by the Ford Motor Company. Visitors boarded one of 160 real Ford convertibles traveling 2 parallel elevated roadways at speeds of up to 8 miles an hour. It was a precursor to the Wedway People Mover. The roads took them through a time tunnel from the time of the dinosaurs to great moments in early man's development to finally the glistening domes of Space City in just 12 minutes. Walt had Imagineers Claude Coats, Mark Davis, and Blaine Gibson devise a prehistoric world with dinosaurs and cavemen for the earliest scene. These full-size dinosaurs were sculpted backstage at Disneyland in a prefab building with an 18-foot doorway to be able to get the figures in and out. Gibson, who would later sculpt pirates and presidents, supervised sculptors like Howard Ball, who had sculpted dinosaurs for the La Brea Tar Pits, and former Yale art professor George Snowden. Gibson himself concentrated on facial areas. He noted, "We are drawn to the head. When we look at wild animals, we are drawn to the eyes."
The dinosaurs, after failed attempts to get Ford to sponsor a pavilion at Disneyland, were relocated to the only area that could hold them, the grand finale of the Grand Canyon diorama on the Santa Fe and Disneyland Railroad. 46 audio-animatronic dinosaurs were relocated to the West Coast and installed as a glimpse into what the Grand Canyon may have looked like millions of years ago. The new edition debuted in July of 1966. Once again, the climax was the battle between the Tyrannosaurus Rex and the Stegosaurus in a bubbling lava-filled environment. And Claude Coats designed the finale of the show.
Claude would find another opportunity to share his love of dinosaurs with the world when he was the project show designer for Epcot Center's Universe of Energy. The Universe of Energy Pavilion was part of the Future World section of Epcot. From 1982 to 1996, it housed the Universe of Energy attraction. At the conclusion of the film, the seating area rotated to face a curtain, which then raised to reveal a primeval diorama. The entire seating area moved into the diorama, where it then broke apart into 6 multi-passenger vehicles that took guests on a 7-minute journey through the diorama, which was populated by numerous animatronic dinosaurs, including a family of Brontosaurus in a swamp, a Stegosaurus fighting an Allosaurus on an overhead cliff, a number of Ornithomimus watching helplessly as one of their own sank into a boiling tar pit, and numerous Pteranodon that were perched around an erupting volcano.
I love how his passion and love for dinosaurs was able to translate into bringing them to life in full-scale replicas in so many different shows. I think it was really unique that we were able to make this connection to all of these historic pieces of Imagineering history, and that when we started this, thought that Claude would be a lesser-known Imagineer. He was a stalwart and really the glue that allowed these kind of attractions to come to life.
Absolutely, and speaking just on like the theme of dinosaurs, it's incredible to look back and look at how influential those have been in each of the parks so far. We look back at the Ford Magic Skyway, we look at the railroad at Disneyland, it tied that into Universe of Energy at Epcot, but those could even be precursors into what was done with Dinosaur at Disney's Animal Kingdom, and moving forward, who knows what we can do with that.
That's a great point because dinosaurs have been a pillar of what the company has been built on. You start back at Fantasia and the dinosaur battle between the Stegosaurus and the Tyrannosaurus Rex, and then you take that to the Ford Magic Skyway, like you said, and it's every generation has something related to dinosaurs with the Walt Disney Company, and then now it's almost dinosaur overload when you have the movie Dinosaur, which while it wasn't a huge success for the Walt Disney Company, it then translates into Dinoland USA at Disney's Animal Kingdom. There will always be something about dinosaurs that excites us. And to have an Imagineer like Claude Coats working with Walt Disney himself, making these dreams come to reality, I think is fantastic. And they still speak to the kids that are within all of us. We all love dinosaurs as a kid. I mean, who doesn't want to go out and dig in their backyard looking for dinosaur bones? Now you can actually do that at Walt Disney World's Animal Kingdom at the Boneyard, and I think Walt and Claude helped all of us live a little bit of our own fantasies in these aspects with bringing dinosaurs to life. Well, what do you think of the Gentle Giant?
Man, I'll tell you one thing. He was way, way ahead of his time. Absolutely revolutionary. He brought so much to life, from his paintings to the stories he helped create for the parks. To be perfectly honest, I'm at a loss for words right now.
Well, that's a first.
So what do you have for us next, Archimedes?
Something very, very special. So we decided to choose Claude as an Imagineering legend because he represents blank to us. Stokes, what does he represent to you, and why did you choose Claude as an Imagineering legend?
I chose Claude as an Imagineering legend because he represents the word perseverance to me, and for several different reasons, really. Realistically, any of these early Imagineers that we talk about could use that word perseverance to them because they make that transition from working in animation to working in parks, and we harp on that a lot in these early episodes, but Claude really took that to a different level. He worked a lot on backgrounds in the animation, and then he translated that to working on backgrounds in the parks at first, before moving on to other things. Being a designer, being someone that's in charge of making sure attractions are done the right way, he was able to take his experience with the studio and directly translate it into the parks. On top of that, he was able to persevere as far as teamwork goes as well. We talked about earlier how the relationship between he and Mark Davis working on the Haunted Mansion at times was a little rocky, but they were able to put their differences to the side and use that teamwork and persevere through their disagreements to make one of the most long-lasting and most treasured attractions to date. So Brian, what word would you use to describe Claude?
So I'm going to go along the same lines that you did, and I'm going to use the word unwavering. I'm going to look at the interactions that he had with Mark Davis during their time with the Haunted Mansion, and he was unwavering because he didn't back down from his stance that he thought the Haunted Mansion needed. He felt it needed to be spooky and a little creepy. So he went with that. Mark wanted to go with it being more of a comedy show, but at the end, like you said, it's one of the most long-lasting attractions that we will ever have in a Disney park. It's in every single Disney park, and if they had wavered in their stance, we probably wouldn't have the classic attractions that we have today. So while it was probably a very tense situation when they both wanted to get their different ways, when they wanted to each lead the project, I think that looking back, they could very easily both be extremely proud of the work that they put in on the Haunted Mansion. And so I would actually use that word for both of them, both Mark Davis and Claude Coats, and say that they were unwavering in their passion for wanting to deliver a certain product to us, the fans. So yeah, that's the one that I decided to go with.
Tune in next month as Archimedes leads us into a new adventure in the Hall of Imagineering as we learn the told and untold stories of another Imagineer.
You've been listening to the Main Street Chronicles, part of the Imagination Radio Network and a BRS production.
Would you like to go on another adventure?